All right. Now, once you're at this stage with your house, we can kind of take a break from modeling and do a little bit of some fun coloring. Now, I'm just noticing, and you will notice things like this as you model, but I'm just noticing these are a little too high up, so we can kind of see under them a little bit too much. So I'm just gonna take a moment and move these down a little bit. Not that we're planning to ever show anything at this angle, but I will typically, if I see something that kind of bugs me a little bit, I'll just go ahead and fix it, even if it means being a bit sidetracked. But I plan on, we're going to be looking at it mainly from this angle, so I don't foresee those being a big issue. So let's get into lighting and shading our model a little bit. Now let's start with some basic lighting settings. Now I'm gonna just make a plane here and just increase it. This will be not a permanent thing. I'm just kind of doing it so I'll get some shadows casting on the plane itself. And we'll add some lights. Now you always want to add Arnold lights. We're going to be rendering with Arnold, so we want to use Arnold lights. Now, it's a very common thing, and this is a big no-no, but it's a very common thing for people to come to rendering and they see that this is where their lights are, and then they just click on this ambient light. Never use an ambient light. Well, I don't want to say never. There is cases where you could use an ambient light, but it doesn't really light physically in the way that we want it to light. So we're going to ignore ambient light pretty much always. In fact, we're going to ignore all of these lights because we want to use Arnold lights. So I'm going to go to the Arnold tab and make sure that I'm using only these lights because these will work with the Arnold renderer. And I don't want to use anything that's not going to work with the Arnold renderer. So if your lights aren't working, just double check, make sure that you're using Arnold lights, and make absolutely sure that you're not using an ambient light at all costs. Ambient lights, again, they don't really light in the way that we would want to light our scene. They basically just flatten out colors. So that's not really what we're looking for here. So I have in my mega shelf, I have some lights here, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a area light for now. And we'll go ahead and increase this. And we're not going to see much at this point. If I hit 7 on my keyboard, that basically turned lights on. So we're not going to see much right away. So we do have light in our scene, but this is a very low light. So let's go to our attribute editor and look at our settings here. Now, one of the first things that I like to do here is turn off normalize. So if we turn off normalize, we'll right away see a little bit of light. Now, let me explain a bit what normalize does. So say I have a small light and I'm going to crank up the intensity to something like 1000. And we still don't see much light there. Now I could move this closer, a little bit closer to the house, and we're still not seeing much light. Let's crank this up to something like 10,000. Still, we see a little bit when we get kind of close to it, but still not much, right? So let's go even higher. So just add another 0 there. Now we're starting to see some light. Now, normally, the amount of light that's being emitted from something correlates with the size of the thing, right? So the bigger something is, the more light it's going to emit. So with our area light now, with our setting way up to 20,000, right? Or is that, yeah, 20,000. Now, if I increase the size of this area light, we're not increasing the amount of light. If anything, it looks like it's emitting less light when we get larger. And that's what this normalized setting does, is no matter what size of your light source, it's always going to emit the same amount of light. Now, this is useful in some cases, and they do have it turned on by default, but I want to light it a little bit more realistically. So I'm going to turn normalize off. And when I do that, you'll notice that it's going to get much brighter right away, right? So everything just turns white, way too bright. So let's go back and really bump down our intensity to something like 50, maybe even lower to something like 10. Okay, now with normalize turned off, if I increase my light size, you'll see that I'm getting an increased amount of light. So that's basically what that normalize function does. We have some other settings here. Exposure, intensity, these pretty much do the same thing. I usually just increase my intensity and leave exposure alone. Color, now we will be changing color a little bit here and there, but for now, I like when I'm just lighting or coloring or shading my objects or shading my models, I like to shade them in a purely white light environment. That way, if you have cool lights or warm lights, they're not interfering with the actual color. I will change these to be cool and warm as we move forward. But when you're just lighting a scene, or when you're just coloring or shading, or what's called look development, you kind of just want to do that with a white light, so it's not going to interfere with your colors at all. Or at least that's what I like to do. So I'm going to change sort of like the position of this light. A few other settings we have here. We do have a spread setting. So we may not see this much in our viewport, but once we start rendering, we will see this spread setting. I'm just going to leave this how it is. I kind of like that the way it is. Maybe increase the intensity a little bit more, something like 20. Then I'm just going to duplicate this light. And just select my duplicate and kind of move it, rotate it around. Basically what I'm trying to do here is just get like a 3-point lighting set up. Again, nothing crazy. I probably won't even keep this lighting scheme. I'm just doing something to kind of light my scene a little bit. So I can see my colors whenever I apply them. So that's pretty good. I think that's a decent lighting setup to start with. Now we're not going to know what this really looks like until we actually do a render. And if you have Arnold installed and ready to go, so you'll see if I come up here and click on my render settings, we'll cover these in more depth later as we get towards the end of the project. But for now, I just kind of want to get an idea of what this is going to look like. You can choose between a GPU renderer or CPU renderer. So depending on what kind of GPU you have in your machine, one may be faster than the other. It just kind of depends. I'm going to use GPU because I do feel like for my machine, it is a bit faster. And then if we want to see a render preview right here in our viewport, all we need to do is come up here to our viewport and click this A button. And that's going to give us a render preview right here in our viewport. Now, if you're using your GPU renderer, it may take a few seconds, maybe up to a minute to actually compute everything. And if you're using your CPU renderer, it will start quicker initially, but it will take longer to render. Whereas your GPU renderer will take a little bit longer on the first stages, and then it will render really quickly afterwards. So with my GPU, you can see that I can sort of rotate around here, and it updates fairly quickly. So let's just switch to the CPU and give you a sense of what that looks like. So I'll switch CPU. And again, click my render preview here. And so initially it kicked in a lot quicker, but it's taking a little bit longer to render the whole scene. But it should give you a little bit better quality overall when you're done with the CPU. I generally will, let me just stop the render there. I will generally, when I'm just kind of figuring colors out, I'll generally use my GPU renderer, but I'm almost always going to use CPU renderer for the final render when it's all said and done. Again, I'm noticing something a little bit here that I don't like, so I want to adjust. Okay, so we have a little bit of a lighting set up. Now we can start coloring things. Now, one big thing that a lot of students will do right off the bat is they'll try to color something. So they'll just select a random object and right click and go to material attributes. And that will bring up this standard surface 1 material. Now what you'll notice that if you try to change the color of this, for example, if we change this to blue, it's going to change the color of everything in our scene because this is our default material. So everything we create gets this default material applied to it. So you generally don't want to have anything with this default material on it. Because it'll just change everything. So I'm going to undo that with Control Z. And what we want to do is create a new material. So we'll start with like our wood objects. So I'm just going to select this guy and I'm going to right click and say assign favorite material. And I'm going to choose standard surface. Now, you're going to use standard surface for pretty much everything we do in this project and probably pretty much everything you do moving forward. Now, there is one case where I'm going to use a surface shader, which is a completely different material. We want to use a standard surface for pretty much everything that we do here. And this is a material that will render in Arnold. There's Arnold materials as well, but the standard surface material will render in Arnold. It's basically an Arnold material that Maya sort of adopted as their own default standard material. So I'm going to assign that. And now we see that if I come in here and sort of like change the color of this, we're only changing the color of this one object. Okay, now if we go to our material and we come up here to the preset button, we do have presets in here. And there may even be a wood preset. I don't think there is one now that I'm looking at it. But we could try something instead of looking for a wood preset. We could start out with something like plastic. We'll do just replace all. And then I'm just going to change my color to more of a brownish. Kind of like a very desaturated brown wood. Now I'm going to come up here to my standard surface here and just change the name to wood. And I'm just going to call this wood SS for standard surface. That way, now check this out. Now if I want to take all of my wood objects here and assign them to that wood material, I can just come in and say, for example, select this house boards group, which are all wood. And then I can come in and just right click one of these, come down to assign existing material, and there's my wood SS right there. So now everything has that wood SS material applied to it. So I'm going to do the same thing for everything else here that is wood. So we have the boards, the end caps. So we want all of these to have that wood material. The porch. Gets the wood material. The main house upper gets the wood material. Chimney, shingles, porch. So we have this other porch over here that will also get the wood material. And then all of our windows. And you'll notice that I put the glass for the windows in a different group entirely. That's because they're going to be made out of a different material. All right, so then we have our wood material applied to everything. Now we can start, we'll do the shingles next. So I'm just going to select one of them and go to assign favorite material and do another standard surface. We'll look at the presets, see if we have anything. Probably clay is going to be as close as we want material-wise. So I'm going to assign some clay, and then we're going to do like a very desaturated, darker bluish color. All right, so that looks pretty good. And now we just need to assign that material to everything. So first we want to name it. So I'm going to go to material attributes and just name this shingle SS for shingle standard surface. And then I'm going to grab my shingles, top shingles, and then we can assign existing material shingle SS. And then my other shingles, which are all these guys, shingle SS. Give that a minute. There's a lot of them, so sometimes it may take a minute for your machine to apply that shader to every single object. There we go. So yeah, that just took a couple seconds. And then we want a brick material. So I'm just going to grab one brick, same process. We're going to go to assign favorite material, standard surface. May try clay again here as well. Unless we have something that might work a little bit better, but I don't think so. I think clay will work pretty good. So we'll just do clay, replace. And this is going to be a very sort of another almost completely gray brown. Something like that. And then we want to name this brick SS. And then we'll just grab all of our bricks, assign our material. Again, this may take a few seconds because it's a lot of objects. There we go. I'm going to apply the same material to our chimney bricks. And then for the actual house here, I'm going to do a different material for this part. I'm going to do like a concrete. We'll call it a concrete material. So I'm just going to right click, assign new favorite, standard surface once again. And we'll do the clay preset once more. But for this one, I'm going to do like a very dark gray, maybe a little bit of tone to it, but a pretty dark gray for this. And we'll name this Concrete SS. And then we just need to also apply this to our chimney. So this is looking all pretty good. And we can do a little test render to see what this looks like at this point. So I'm just going to cancel that and we'll jump back. I want to turn on my GPU render just because I think that is going to render it a little bit quicker. But we notice right off the bat that we do have some color problems here. Like colors aren't really exactly what they look like in our viewport. So just one more time, if we do a quick render of that. We'll see that our colors do all look quite a bit off. So we will need to do some tweaking to those. Not quite sure why they're that much off from what we see in the viewport, but they are a little bit off. I think it may have something to do with our clay material and our wood material presets. So I want to come in here and look at a few settings here. So I'm going to come down to subsurface and I'm going to turn for my wood, I'm going to turn my subsurface weight all the way down and just make sure I don't have any other settings here that may go wrong. So yeah, I'm just going to come into each one of my materials here and just look through here and make sure that they don't have, that's definitely what was changing some of these. So I'm just going to come and make sure they don't have any sort of subsurface material applied to them. And we can see that pretty much all the clay objects have this subsurface material or subsurface attribute that I just want to bump down to 0. So now we should get something a little bit more along the lines of what we're looking for color-wise. There we go. That looks way better. So the last thing I want to color here are my windows. So I'm just going to select one of my windows here. And once again, we'll do assign favorite material, standard surface. And for this one, I'm going to use my glass preset, so frosted glass. But I don't want them to be transparent, or I don't want them to be that transparent. So I want to come to transmission, and I'm really going to decrease my transmission weight here. This is basically what's going to control how transparent my windows are, and I don't want them to be that transparent. So I'm going to take this, for now, I'm just going to take it all the way down to 0 and kind of see what kind of result we get from that. And then I'll go to my window group and I'll just assign that material to all of my windows. Oh, let's name it first. So we'll name this window glass SS. And then we'll go to there. And once again, we'll take a quick look in the viewport render, what this looks like. And I think that looks pretty good. Our windows obviously aren't very transparent, but keep in mind that for the most part, we're in a very black background. So if you have anything that's really reflective, it's going to reflect its environment. And at the moment, we're in a very black environment. So we're not really seeing much with our windows. We will work on those and improve those. But for now, I think this is looking great. I think this is a great outcome of all the work we've done so far. And what I would like to cover next in the next video is getting some variation in tones and colors throughout our model. So I want all of our shingles to be a slightly different color. I want all of our wood panels to be slightly different color, all of our bricks and so on, to get a much more of a natural, varied look in our final product.